Hello friends! There are many incredible brushes that come pre-installed with Procreate, and we're going to explore some of them. In this video, I'm going to attempt to create a digital mixed media drawing using 3 different default brushes. All right, let's first find the brushes. So open up the brush library. First, we're going to go down to the painting section, and we're going to find the Tamar brush. Next, head to the sketching section, and I'm going to try the Procreate pencil. And finally, in the artistic section, I'm going to try the hearts brush. And just for reference, I'll be working on a canvas that's set to 3000 pixels square at 300 dpi. As usual, we're going to look at the brush behaviors first, and I'm just going to go through this a little more quickly since we'll be using 3 brushes this time. So let's start with the Tamar brush. I'm going to do a quick stroke test. So this is what it looks like at the smallest size, at a medium size, and close to the largest size. I'm not going to go to the largest because, yeah, as I suspected, it would fill the whole canvas. It's a pretty smooth stroke at the smallest size. Then you start to see more texture here at the medium size. It's only slightly textured though. You see a little variation here, but mostly along the edges. And then you see a little bit more of that variation in color and that texture at the largest size. It gets really evident here. Here I can already see that the brush is pressure sensitive because there's a shift in value. Clearly there was lighter pressure at the beginning of the stroke, and then the color got darker as the pressure increased. I'm just going to do a couple of quick swatches to test the transparency. And like with most pressure sensitive brushes, the transparency will shift depending on how much pressure is used. So you can see here I was applying some fairly light pressure, so you can see this red behind the pink, and here you can see the orange and pink overlapping pretty clearly. But here with the yellow, I applied more pressure, so it's not as easy to see that orange behind the yellow. Also, that pressure sensitivity will show up if I change my grip. So it's not only very transparent, but I'm also seeing like different kinds of textures coming through as well. Now I'm going to switch to the smudge tool, see what that does. It doesn't really blend that great with the smudge tool, and as usual, it's kind of removing a ton of that texture. All right, let's check out the Procreate pencil next. This is at a very small size, a medium size, and this is the brush at 100%. Now, clearly on this size canvas, the brush strokes remain really, really small. And I don't think that's going to do much for me, so I actually decided to make an extra large version of the brush. And by the way, if you're not sure how to do that, watch my Brush Studio Basics video for a quick demo. So with this extra large version, this is the brush at the smallest size. This is a medium size. And this is the brush at 100%. Now in the Brush Studio, I didn't increase the maximum size all the way to 100%. I just bumped it up slightly. So I still don't have a massive range in sizes, but I do get a lot more texture here, and I feel like it will give me a little bit more flexibility when I start using it. Now with this brush, there is a little bit of pressure sensitivity. It's not huge, but you can see that with light pressure, you get a lighter color and a much more dense and rich color with more pressure. I'm going to change my grip and see if there's much transparency here. And you really, because of the nature of this brush, you don't really see obvious transparency because with this loose grip, you're just getting a really grainy texture. Now, if I use the smudge tool with this brush, it doesn't do much at a smaller size. The smudge tool just kind of feels like it would if you smudged graphite or charcoal. It's kind of giving you a lighter, smoother version. Okay, let's see what the hearts brush does. Here's a stroke at a really small size. That's 1%. Then slightly larger. Wow, that got pretty big pretty fast. That's only 17%. So I'm going to do the largest size on a new layer. And as I suspected, it pretty much fills the canvas at the largest size. So at a small size, the stroke is really grainy. And of course, you see much more texture at a larger size. It's super chunky on the edges. There's a little change in value there. And at its largest size, it basically looks like splattered paint. So let's do a super quick transparency test. Just like with the Tamar brush, the level of transparency depends on how much pressure you apply. So here it looks pretty opaque, whereas here where I applied a lot less pressure in this area, it's very transparent. You can see the red showing through the orange quite easily. So that tells me this brush should be very transparent with a loose grip. And yes, it definitely is. So it really feels like a very light paint wash, and you've got all these little specks. This actually is reminding me a lot of the Terralia brush, just how super transparent it is, and this type of texture in the brush definitely looks a lot like Terralia. Now let's try using the smudge tool, see what it does. Yeah, the smudge tool basically just wipes out all that beautiful texture. And if I use it at a larger size, it doesn't really blend. It just sort of looks like I'm splashing different colors of paint. There might be a good use for that. I don't know if it's something I would use necessarily, but it's interesting to see what it does. Okay, so I decided to draw a strawberry. So I'm first going to do a really loose sketch with the Tamar brush. I've got the size down really low to 2%. And I just want to map out where I'm going to put everything first. So Tamar did a decent job of sketching. It wouldn't necessarily be my go-to sketching brush, but you know, it wasn't too bad. I was at least able to control the strokes at this really small size and get my rough thoughts down. What I really think this brush will be good for is getting a really nice painterly look. So I'm working on a new layer and I'm just going to fill that with color. And I want to keep a lot of this really nice texture. So I'm not going to be too precious about how I'm putting down the color. I'm going to add some highlights in different colors. And because this brush is pressure sensitive, I can play around with just how transparent or opaque these additions are. So like here, I can really work with the transparency and just layer color over color, or I can add more pressure and get more opacity in some areas. So I want some shadow here. I love that I can just add a really light wash of this darker color so that the other colors show through, but it does create a little bit of shadow. Having such a really big range in sizes on this brush really does give you a lot of flexibility, because I'm still using the Tamar brush, but I've got it down pretty small for the seeds. I want to draw a little shadow behind those seeds. I wonder if the Procreate pencil would be good for that. Let's try it. Okay, at a fairly small size. I think this is a little too much texture for that. But if I drop the size down, I can go in and get a nice little kind of rough mark behind each of those seeds. I'm actually curious to see how the Tamar brush would work for this shadow. I like that too. I think either one would be great. Tamar is a little bit more loose, I guess, because I can just kind of add one simple stroke and I've got my shadow, whereas I was finding myself kind of drawing the shadows in with the Procreate pencil. So either one is a good option there. Now, I don't necessarily want to blend these colors. I don't want them to be too smooth, but let me try something here. I'm going to create a clipping mask above that shape. And I've got the Tamar brush at a fairly large size. So I'm just going to add a super light layer of red over everything to kind of tone some of that down a little bit. Yeah, that transparency is coming in really handy. So that's the comparison. Yeah, I think I'll keep it. I'm using the Tamar brush to outline, then fill the leaves. And I'm going to use different colors for the highlights and shadows. These leaves do need some detail though, so I think I'll use the Procreate pencil for that. This pencil is actually really nice and smooth at this size. It's like using a really soft graphite, but with some additional texture. I'm going to use the Procreate pencil to add a few shadows under the leaves here, just because I think the change in texture might be nice from the smooth look of the paint to this more grainy look. So I've got it at the largest size here, so that texture will come through. I think I have to go a little darker for these areas. Okay, so strawberry blossoms are white. So I'm going to add a colored background, and I'm going to use that really nice textured and painterly hearts brush. So I've got the brush set all the way to 100%, and I'm just going to add a little color back there. And I'll darken it up behind where I want the flowers to go. And I'm back to the Tamar brush at a really small size to get these petals. Now, even though the Tamar brush can be very transparent, if you keep adding layers and apply a little bit more pressure, it gets opaque enough to cover even light over dark, which is really great. I was thinking that I might have to underpaint these flowers, but the brush is holding its own. For the flower centers, I'm using the Tamar brush to put the first layer of color down. Then I can add loose details and texture with the Procreate pencil. I'm also using the pencil for the shadow under the strawberry. All right, all done. Final thoughts on these brushes. The Tamar brush reminded me of the Eagle Hawk brush, which I reviewed in another video. I like the expressive, painterly look, and the range and transparency created lots of opportunities to experiment, especially with layering colors. Now, I've used a Procreate pencil before, and I find it much more interesting to use after changing the size setting in the Brush Studio. I personally probably wouldn't use it at its original size because there are other default pencil brushes that I like more. But at this larger size, the grainy texture was a nice addition. I really do like the look of the hearts brush. I think the texture is really pretty and it worked well as a background. As I mentioned earlier, it reminds me of the Taralia brush, so maybe it could work as a watercolor option. I haven't tried it for that purpose, but it's something to keep in mind. Using a variety of brushes mimicking different mediums is a great way to add depth and complexity to your digital art. I definitely could have pushed the mixed media look even further, so I have a good excuse to keep experimenting with different brush combinations just to see how I can push myself a little bit more creatively. Do you have a favorite mixed media brush combo? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you'd like to see more from this brush review series, there's a link to the playlist in the description. Also, if you enjoyed this video, I'd love if you'd give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.